ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world. Happy Independence Day. We are bringing you a conversation that I am really excited about, and I've been looking forward to actually for many, many years. I can think of nobody better to join us to really fully kick off summer, to explore this moment in America, to reflect on our independence. Then the great and powerful Luke Russert is here on Independent Americans. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I appreciate it.
Dude, we were just talking as we warmed up. I think the last time I saw you in person was a long time ago.
Yeah, I was at the book party for Rachel Maddow's book Drift about Afghanistan. So that's been a minute. And then how amazing that everything she wrote about in that book pretty much came to fruition about 7 years later. So
Right?
that was what a memory. What a memory.
But I think, I really admire you, and I consider us kind of distant friends, and you're a guy that I love rooting for, and I've been watching, and it's been really exciting to watch this journey you've been on.
Yeah.
And I have a real heart for anybody dealing with loss, but also going on a journey. And I feel like for years I've been wondering, and I think I maybe even sent you notes, and I said, dude, I hope you're writing a book. Because I've been loving watching you, but it's also just great to see you, man, and to see you out there. And I want to start with a question I ask everybody: where are you, Luke, and how are you?
Well, I'm doing well. I'm in Washington, D.C. at the moment, our nation's capital, my hometown. But it's been now almost 7 weeks since my book, Look For Me There, Grieving My Father and Finding Myself, has come out. It had an incredible run as a top 10 New York Times bestseller for a month. And that was certainly humbling and gratifying. But for me, the most powerful thing has just been the responses from folks, especially older people. When I wrote the book, I thought there'd be a lot of people sort of our age range that would relate to it. But I've gotten letters from people in their 70s and 80s and 90s that have reached out and said, I lost a parent, or I lost a child, or I lost a loved one decades ago, and this book helped me process that. I never expected that. When I wrote the book, I was just trying to help one kid who lost their dad feel a little less lost. And when all these other people, seasoned people who I would look up to, if you will, sort of showing their vulnerabilities and saying, I stored and ignored a lot for many, many years. Thank you for giving me sort of an outlet to process my own emotions. So that's just been incredible. So, bestseller lists are nice, but that's what really matters. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it really is. It makes you feel good,
Well, congratulations on it, man, because I think part of the support that you're feeling is you're a guy that people root for. And I think just like your dad, and I imagine your grandfather, there's something in you that's real special that, as a friend, as a fan, as someone who was in your orbit, I was always rooting for you. And I think a lot of other folks did too. And there's a part that I was thinking about, and I want to just thank you for sharing so much, because sharing is hard. And, I think we may have mentioned this when your dad first passed. I've done a lot of work with TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for survivors, and a lot of kids who've lost folks. And Bonnie Carroll always taught me, you mourn their passing, but you celebrate their life. And you've been, celebrating just life in general, I think, which is really exciting, and obviously celebrating your dad and your family. But your dad was like an example to me growing up as a dad, right? As I got 2 little boys now, and you are an example as a son. And I think you together, this story you're telling is really an example for everybody's sons and everybody's dads. And I just want to thank you for it. Because I was sharing some of the pictures of my son over breakfast this morning, and sharing is hard, but you've done it in a very candid and powerful way that I think is really going to make an impact on people's lives. So I want to share that with you, man, say thank you for it. And as you've been on this journey, I know you're talking a lot about the book. There was something in there that I read when it starts in Maine, and you said the Church of Living Free.
Yeah.
Right? Can you talk about that? Because we've had Sebastian Younger on this show who's talked about freedom. We've had Ken Burns on, who I know we've had these folks who are thinking about the journey and the moment and life and these bigger issues. But can you talk about the Church of Living Free?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we talk a lot about freedom, right, in America, and both parties have their definition of freedom, and it's something that is used in advertisements, it's used in rhetoric, it's used as sort of why what we die for, what we fight for, et cetera. And I realized that freedom is it's a unique thing in the sense of that we're always going to have to fight for it in some capacity. There's always going to be those evil people among us who are going to try to take it away, right? So you're constantly on watch, you're constantly on guard about freedom in a government sense. What I realized though, writing the book, was that the place where you can truly be free is inside yourself. And it took me many years to realize that. And the first time I ever felt that true freedom actually was in the backwoods of Maine. So I left my job at NBC. I was a correspondent for 8 years, had a great gig, covered the House of Representatives, covered the Senate. I was on the up and up trajectory. You know, sky was the limit, almost being groomed for whatever position. But I didn't feel fulfilled. I didn't know why I was doing it. Was I doing it to live up to my dad's legacy? Was I doing it because people said I was good at it, or that it just was the right thing to do, et cetera? I didn't know. And I knew that I would never be successful in anything if I had that lingering over me for a long time. Is this really what you want to do? Is this really what you're about? And part of that was I didn't feel like I was free to make that decision, and I needed to get to that space. And so I left the gig and I went and just started traveling. And that moment I bring about in Maine is I'm on this old logging road in a logging forest that is totally outside of the depths of GPS. You're completely lost. And I am dodging these timber trucks that are going 100 miles an hour full of just tons of cargo, right? And I'm with my dog and I'm in the pickup truck my father got me when I graduated from high school. And I just pull over in a moment there, you know, by the river in this forest, and it's just so quiet and it's so peaceful. And I realized, like, man, this is I'm 31 years old, and this is the first moment that I really felt free to think and free just to start processing things that have happened in my life, whether it's loss, whether it's who I am, independent of the job, independent of my last name. And that was a sort of personal freedom that came through. And I think it's really important for people to try to have those moments. Whether it's shifting your environment, which is just, or taking your phone and throwing it in the, throwing it away
Yeah.
for a few hours, and just really unplugging and start to think internally a little bit. And there's a power to that. There's a real power of aloneness, where I think freedom lives a lot.
This is exactly what I wanted to get in with you, like especially this week, because freedom is a word that's thrown around. Sebastian wrote a whole book about it. I think when I was watching you from the outside, right, as a fan and as someone I would consider a friend, you know, I was rooting for you, but I saw you going through that journey. And I've seen so many of my friends, especially combat vets, come home and go through a journey after a tough experience. And you see the evolution. And I also remember seeing you on NBC, being on at the same time with you, being in the same green rooms, and watching you go through it. And frankly, man, sometimes I felt like I was watching like a quarterback play running back. Like I could tell that you had all this talent, but you were kind of in a position that wasn't exactly the right fit for you. And now when you went on this journey, I feel like you're just blossoming in your own freedom, right? And that's really what I saw as a young man, in finding his freedom, embracing his freedom, and now sharing that freedom with others at a time when it's really been, I think, cannibalized and manipulated. And you're showing folks what it really means to be free. And I think that that's important and powerful. And I wanted to ask you, there was a line that you quote from your grandpa, right? When your dad's quoting your grandpa and you talk about America, right? And he says, what a country. Don't worry, I still believe in it. Even when times get tough, the power of the American promise forever uplifts, right? And I recommend everybody check out the book. But can you talk about the country right now? You've had this great viewpoint from so many levels, and in the back roads and in the diners and on TV. You've become in many ways, I think, an expert on America. I really think so. And I put you in that class with like a Ken Burns and a Sebastian. People really thought about it and lived in it and seen it. And your dad was such an expert on America. Can you talk about, especially as we reflect on July 4th, Luke, where do you think America is right now?
Well, thank you. That's a very kind compliment. I've been to 49 states. I still have to get to North Dakota. So then I'll be truly, truly American, right? 50 out of 50. I think we're in a difficult period, and we all know that. And it feels as if we've sort of been in this holding pattern to a degree. Like we think things are going to get better, but they never do get better. So we don't really know what getting better is. And I think a lot of that also stems from just think of what the nation has gone through over the last few years, but then keep like let's go back. I always say you got to look at things from 35,000 feet, and I still think we're processing 9/11 still. We're processing those two wars still. We're processing. I think we're still processing Sandy Hook. I think we're still processing the economic recession of '08. You know, there's all these things that happen so quickly, and there is this idea of okay, American resolve, like we can get through it. We got through the world wars. Yes, but these things happened very close, and these are huge. To have 9/11, okay, and the greatest economic catastrophe since the Great Depression within a span of 8 years, or is it 7 years? Excuse me, 7 years.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. So I tell people that when you have these types of traumatic events, and then you pair it now with a technology that is completely unharnessed, that nobody really knows what it is. And what I mean by that is when you have the power of the internet, you have the power of Wi-Fi, and you have the power of connectivity. So suddenly people have to process these very difficult moments, and there are very few gatekeepers anymore. So people can live in their own ecosystems more easily than ever. And the technology, we're still trying to figure out a relationship with that because we've never had to process these huge events with all this noise coming in at us that it's hard to differentiate what is truth and what is fiction. So that's what I attribute it to. I think we as a people are actually way more united than we think. It sounds cliche, you know, you hear politicians say that, but it's true. I've lived it. I mean, you go around the United States, most people are kind, they're hardworking, they want to put a roof over their heads, they want food in their belly, they want opportunity for their children, and they just want to be treated with kindness and respect. That's the majority of America. And I think what's so hard is that it's been difficult to figure out, okay, what can I do to contribute, or what can I do to affect change, or what can I do to feel like I got some skin in the game here, because it feels like my common sense voice is just drowned out by all this incoming. That is a lot of it coming from people who are profiting off of manipulation, or who are doing the things because it's easy. So I think that we're in this period where we're trying to process the magnitude of these difficult events that have happened over the last 2 decades, and we're doing it up against this technology that we don't understand. And here comes AI down the road. And what's that going to do? So I just tell people, I'm like, think about how most often, if you go into a restaurant or you go into a grocery store, 95% of the people you encounter are nice to you. Yep. Right? There's always a bad apple here or there. And it's the same thing with the incoming from social media. It's just most people are good natured, but you're always going to have those bad actors. And I think they have way too much influence now.
Well, I think this is a moment where the country is starved for leadership. And as that's all coming at them, they're looking for people to help them process it, to help them interpret it, to help them make meaning of it, to put it in perspective. And that's why I'm so frankly excited about this emergence of you on the national landscape, because I hope this is, just the beginning of a new era of Luke Russert. But I think you're the kind of guy that I want to check in with from time to time to get your read on the country, to get your read on what's happening as a thought leader, as someone who I would consider almost, inheriting a mantle of being a protector of America, a guardian of this country, right? Something I know your whole family has taken seriously. I see you got, your family name is up on the wall behind you. And I feel like the country is looking for people who are willing to put their family name out there and say, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe in, and this is what you should pay attention to, and this is noise. So I really, especially among young people, I think we're starved for this new generation of leaders to emerge, and I feel like you're one of them, man. So as you do that, let me ask you. You know, you also covered politics. The political landscape is such an opposite from what we just described about this landscape in America. Where do you see the path? As you know, I think we're both optimistic about America overall, but we obviously recognize that the crisis that we're in now, if you would even call it that, but I would. Where do you see the path politically? You know, we talk a lot about independence on the show. There's a thirst for other options and new leaders. I think you're the type of voice that captures some of that energy. So where do you see the path forward politically for this country?
It's a good question. I think if you look out and you see, all right, who are leaders that seem to have the respect where the other side will say, you know what, I don't agree with them, but I respect them enough and they're actually competent and do a decent job. And I think it's interesting. You look around the country. So one person I've been impressed with is the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. And I think that she sort of struck a balance of trying to reach out to the other side, but not being totally dragged down the rabbit hole of her own party. And I think that's sort of where you got to go. You got to look in that space. Sununu in New Hampshire is another example on the Republican side. Someone who is, you know, most Democrats, if you injected them with truth serum in New Hampshire, would say Sununu's done a decent job as governor, right? And I've always been fascinated with the sort of those types of leaders that are pragmatic, they're technocratic. Charlie Baker is the governor of Massachusetts. I often said that, like, if Charlie Baker had run for president, he likely would have won in a landslide. And like that's where the country is that in Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. I think it's these sort of pragmatic governors that understand you're not going to get everything. And the most important thing is that people feel like you're competent and they're getting something in return for the taxes that they're paying. You notice I said all governors, and that's because I do think there is a real lack of leadership in Washington in terms of our federally elected leaders. And the reason being is I think it's gotten to a point now where it's complicated. So I'm going to go through it. I think one thing is the boomers have not got off stage, right? And their coalitions are still very much around, and you have to play, you have to weave your way through to get into a position of leadership. So you look at Hakeem Jeffries, right, is now the leader of the House Democrats. It took him a long time to get there, right? And while he's still number one, Pelosi's in the background, Hoyer's in the background, Clyburn's in the background, right? So that's very, very difficult. Then on the Republican side, I think what you have is you don't know who's in charge. What I mean by that, it seems like the furthest part of the most right-wing part of the party seems to dictate where these guys go. And no one's had the fortitude to sort of stand up and say, hey, I'm going to lead the party this way. Like, we are conservatives. We're going to lower your taxes and kill terrorists, right? And like, that's it.
Yeah,
and stop playing, like, stop going in these like far, far, far rabbit hole right-wing politics that pop up. And that was what I learned covering Congress, is that sometimes it felt like the conservative provocateurs were the ones who were dictating policy. And that would be upsetting because, again, most of the Republicans in the House, like in the House and the Senate, a lot of them actually just want to go and do work, like political work, but they never know what's going to come on the right. So I don't know how you fix it in Washington. I think it's going to take a combination of pragmatic younger leaders that want to work across the aisle and having the faith to sort of, hey, we're going to jump in this deep end together. And there's no trust right now. I think that's a big problem. But I think if you started to see more trust across the aisle to say, hey, this is going to be difficult, but we're going to do this together. And if our base eats us alive, our base eats us alive. I mean, that's one thing I think more people should talk about, is that majority of these guys now in Congress, a lot of them have money. Okay. They're pulling in $170K a year. All right. If you lose because you stood on your principles, it's okay. You're going to be fine.
Right.
You're going to get a job lobbying. You're going to get a job doing something else. You're not going to end up, without a home. You'll be able to pay your bills.
Right.
And that's the one thing I don't get. It's like this fear of losing And it's like, what are you doing? What?
Yeah.
What? If you're not willing to gamble, if you're not willing to put it all out on the line for what you believe in, what are you doing? You
Well,
know?
a lot of it, Luke, is they're holding on to power, right? And
But that's
that,
the thing. A lot of these backbenchers aren't. And that's what I
yeah.
don't get. It's like it's this waiting game, and it's okay. It is, I do have some power here, and maybe if things fall into place and it'll get there. And I get that. But,
Yeah.
I talk about in 2010, I went in the state of Ohio, and I covered all these swing Democrats who had won in '08, were on the ballot in 10, who had voted for the healthcare bill, which was a very, controversial bill. And it was, to me, a real profile in courage. These people did it. And they all lost, every single one of them who I covered. And I reached out to one of them, a guy named John Bocherry, later on, and he's like, "Yeah, I have no regrets." And I think he's a veteran too. And he goes, "I have no regrets." It's like, what else do you go to Washington for if not to enact some meaningful big change? You might disagree with the healthcare bill, you might support the healthcare bill. Okay. The point is that it was a meaningful piece of legislation that has helped a lot of people, right? That's what you do.
Yeah.
And you lose, you go on. And
Yeah.
and that's the one thing I wish we had more politicians that were not afraid of losing.
Let me
Okay.
ask you this, Luke, because I think you're touching on a point we've explored on this show a lot, which is like the rise of authentic and largely independent, what we would call independent leaders. We had Mayor Yemi Mobilati from Colorado Springs on in the last episode. We've had Wes Moore on this show, who I know and
Maryland, yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good guy, and they're outside the box politicians. They're trying to be uniters. They're in my view positive. They're good role models for your kids. They're people we can look up to who add light and not just heat. But as we watch this generation rise up, we have also, I think, what you kind of named is the rise of the backbenchers, right? Where you've got like backbenchers in the starting lineup, and that's kind of disrupted everything, right? But there is this core of new leaders coming up, and I want to just ask you straight up. I assume your dad was an independent. I assume you're an independent, but I don't know. Would you run? Because you're the kind of guy that, look, you put you on. Wes Moore is going to run for president. You could be a great VP candidate. You could be a governor. You could be a member of Congress. But you're somebody that people trust, Luke. And especially this next generation, you understand all sides of it. Would you ever run for office?
I never say never, but I have to tell you, covering it so closely, there was two things that left a bad taste in my mouth: is the influence of money and the way you have to ask for money consistently. I don't think people realize that, but like, you get elected to Congress, they bring you in, to the building. The first thing you do is like the office lottery to see where you're going to be on, in the Capitol, right? Yeah. The second thing is, oh, here's the address of the DCCC or the NRCC, and every day you got to go for 2 or 3 hours and work the phones, and it's a certain amount of money being raised, right? And then you have the rise of the super PACs, and that just, to me, is it turns off so many people. And I think you start to see you're starting to see that because there is a huge candidate recruitment issue on both sides.
Yeah.
The second thing is just, you talk about Roosevelt's man in the arena, and I think people are used to taking in a lot of incoming if they're running for office. But it's gotten to the point now where it's so vulgar, it's so crude, and politics has always been tough, but you've never had the technology that I think puts people in a lot of danger consistently.
Yeah.
And really exposes like their families and all these things to really difficult things. So those are the two things that have always sort of turned me off, that I'm not really at peace with. That being said, I never say never. I'm always sort of interested in sort of where the country goes, but I think I'm much better off sort of analyzing and highlighting things that are important and going from there.
I'm going to be among the crew that's going to start the Draft Luke campaign, because you're exactly the kind of guy we need in Washington, because you understand real people and you understand policy and you understand how to listen and how to communicate with clarity, and you've got authenticity. So I think that's really, I think we're going to find this as you continue to speak more. I think people are going to respond more deeply, respond more passionately, and are going to ask you, what do you think? What would you do? will you serve? And
I
know
think
you're gonna keep giving them
listening.
the stiff arm,
No,
but
no, listening is so important. I'm happy you brought that up because that's something that I learned traveling the world is the value in listening and being perceptive. And that is something that is really a lost art, which is scary to me. And I think part of that is, I keep harping about the technology, but like the technology should make it easier to listen, but it makes it harder,
yeah.
right? And that's sort of something that I'm trying to wrap my head around is we have very few good listeners left in Congress, or maybe they're good, but they're not vocalizing what they're seeing enough. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have folks on this show that I really consider, guardians of the soul of America.
Right.
And I think, you are representing this next generation. And it's powerful and it's important, but you also, part of it is, you have this great understanding of the culture of America.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to think every time I have a guest on, what shirt am I going to wear? And I'm like, you know what, Luke, I'm wearing my Little League coach shirt.
I love it.
We just finished our Little League season.
How'd you guys do?
We won the championship.
All right. Thanks
in the bottom of the sixth inning. In our league, you do coach pitch for 4 and 5, and then kid pitch for 4 and 5, and then in the sixth inning, the final inning, we get coach pitch again, and the mighty Timber Rattlers pulled it off in the bottom of the sixth. But I think I've said before, mandatory service I'm a fan of. I would love to have people have to work in restaurants. I'd also love for every American to have to coach, to just understand how important that is. But sports has been a really formative part of your life. You understand the intersection with politics. You've been talking about the Bills constantly, which is kind of like the perfect team for you to root for, right? But I want to ask you a specific question. It's July 4th. Baseball is totally changed, and I think reborn in a lot of ways. Can I just hand you the ball and say, changes to Major League Baseball, July 4th, Luke Russert, here's the pitch.
All right, so my first reaction, I'm a national season ticket holder. And before that, I used to go to Orioles games with my father. So grew up around baseball my entire life. Absolutely adore it. My first reaction to the rule changes, all right, was for night games, I loved it. For day games, I was like, oh no, I want more time in the sun to sort of drink beer and hang out. Night game, this is great. This is moving. Like I'm going to get home and get to chill and go to bed, right? But I think now, after watching almost half a season, baseball saved itself. I give it a lot of credit. I think that there are purists who are angry about it, and I get that. But if you go to a game now, and the attendance numbers show this, it is a remarkably better experience. Like you're engaged, the ball's in play, there's more hitting. Like the pitcher gets in a groove, and you see these incredible matchups now because there's some pitchers who understand the psychology of moving quickly. Like Max Scherzer is a great example of it. There's other pitchers that are still learning it. And that's been one of the fun things for me as a fan to sort of watch these players try and there's always been a lot of psychology in baseball, right? But trying to psych each other out using the speed clock and how to do it. Harper's really good at it too from the hitting side. So I think baseball is in a great place. And honestly, that might be an inspiration for America, right? Like, here's our national pastime. It made some hard changes. Not everybody was about it, but you know what they did? They jumped out in the deep end together and it worked out. So yeah, let that be a lesson. I like that parallel, man. I really do.
You crushed that pitch. That was great. I mean, even the ending, I teed it up for you, and I was hoping you'd hit it, but you crushed it. And I think that there's a huge insight into what's happening. And I met some German tourists yesterday, and they were saying, "Hey, what should I do when I'm in New York?" I said, "Go to a Yankee game." And the woman was like, "Yeah, but baseball is really slow. And we went one time before 10 years ago." I said, "It's totally different. You're gonna really love it. It's great." And she said, "Okay, we'll give it a try." And even maybe more importantly, the Yankees had a 10-inning game the other night that ended at like 9:48. My kids could see the whole game.
The one that I will never get over was the Red Sox-Yankees Sunday night extra inning game that was done in 2 hours and 40-something minutes.
I mean,
I went to Boston College, so I went to some of those Sunday night Yankee Red Sox baseball games. Those were 9 hours long.
Yes. I went to a Tigers
forever.
game when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I went to a Tigers game when I was a kid that I think was a night game that I think went 17 innings.
Oh my God.
I don't know what time we got home.
Yeah.
We kind of held fast, but my kids, have really, it's happening at the same time my kids are playing Little League. And I think it's really re-inspired the country and brought back this great game. It's kind of like, for a couple of years, we've been having to sell America and be like, look, come on, America's still in there. It's really great. And people are like, I don't know. And now we've been telling them about baseball and now they believe it. So I think that intersection between baseball and America is really spot on and powerful. You've generously agreed to stick around for a couple of questions for our Patreon members. Big thanks to them.
Yeah, I do that. I wanted to say one thing though.
But please, and I got one more question for you. I got a final pitch for you after this one, but go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things you just said about mandatory national service is something that I've thought a long time about. And I think one of the reasons why the World War II generation was so successful was because of that great equalizer. There was a common understanding where everybody from, all across the country was sort of put together and forced to do something. And traveling around the world and seeing countries that have that mandatory national service, that's what it does. And I don't know what that should look like. I mean, one of the things I've sort of spoken about is my mom was a Peace Corps volunteer. So you have something like, all right, you give 18 months to AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, the military, Teach for America, something like that, where everyone's sort of put together with a common experience around the ages of 18 and 19. And all the studies show that kids are better off going to college like a year later or 2 years later to have some sort of lived experience. And I really wish that would happen. And I think, again, to compare that to baseball, like, let's say we put out that change. You're going to have people that say no, you're going to have lawsuits against it, right? You're going to have rich people that don't want to do it. You're going to have people that say it violates, their religion, or it violates, their whatever. But eventually, I think most people would look at it and say, yeah, this is probably good for us overall, because we need to have that sort of connectiveness that we've lost, right? And if everybody at age 18, 19, 20 is put together and gives back, it would go a long way. It really would go a long way. I mean, imagine taking a kid from like Alabama, right, and pairing him with a kid from Harlem, and pairing them with a kid from Seattle, right, and a kid from Oklahoma, and they're put together, and it could be something is, okay, you know what? You're going to clean up garbage in Cincinnati, and you're going to do it for 18 months, and you're going to live together, and you're going to understand one another, and then you're going to be done and go do whatever you want. I mean, I just think there's a lot of value add there.
Yeah, and we have the great example of Ukraine right now.
Right.
Where I've said a lot, in the last year, Ukraine has felt a bit more American than America does, because there is that unity of purpose, and they've had a level of cohesion and involvement, and under threat that in many ways, going back to your point about 9/11, we could have handled 9/11 in a way, spiritually, socially, culturally, was like that. Instead, I think we lost our way, and you have been a guide, I think, in helping bring us back to the right azimuth for this country. And I don't know what this iteration of Luke is, but it's powerful. And it's everybody's longing for Anthony Bourdain Day was yesterday. We've had my friend Baratunde on this show. I just want to put a GoPro on your head and just have you go around America and just see what you experience, because it's so powerful and important. Let me ask you a final question, Luke.
Sure.
July 4th, if you come over to our house for a barbecue, and everybody says, all right, Luke, give a 4th of July toast, what would you say to the
4th of July toast, man? Here's what I would raise for America on her birthday, is that for all the problems that we have, I truly believe, more so than any other country, our heart's always been in the right place. And one of my favorite artists, Bruce Springsteen, talks about, you have the American dream and the American reality, and that his music lives in that sort of intersection and the emptiness in between those things, right? And I would just simply say that even on our worst, I still think we hope for the best, and we're trying for the best. So I'm always optimistic about the country, because I've traveled the world and I've seen other places, and there's other places that do certain things better than us. I will admit to that. But when it comes down to these aspirations of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the ability to try and change to make things better, I think we're still pretty damn good. So keep it going. It's not easy. It's not easy, and there's a lot of people that want to take us, to our worst impulses. But in terms of a real unity and diversity, I think we have way more of it than people think.
Well, Luke Russert, America loves you. America's rooting for you, and America needs you. So
No,
we're gonna keep
thank you.
calling on you to help us understand it. Every generation of Russert has been so important in contributing to this country, and I know that your family is proud of you. We're grateful for your whole family, your mom included, who maybe doesn't get enough shine. But I gotta leave you with one last thing too. As the father of two young boys, you're the kind of son that my kids can look up to, and I hope my kids turn out like you do. I think that's every parent's dream. But also, I can't wait to see the next generation, because when you're a dad and what happens next, and when you're a granddad, it's going to be something to see, man. So my thanks to everybody. Go check out Luke's amazing book. Look for me there. Thank you, my friend, for all you do and for joining us. Happy July 4th, and stay vigilant.
Absolutely. God bless America.
God bless America.